longer the U.S. refrains from tackling Islamic terrorism overseas, the closer the U.S. is going to be to that occasion, which would dwarf September 11 in New York, in Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco.
Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast where we shine the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jews and Christians, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. On this week's podcast, I have invited former U.S. Israeli Ambassador to the Southwest, Yoram Ettinger, back on the podcast to discuss the woke rights isolationist agenda. Ambassador Ettinger is one of the foremost thought leaders on U.S. education and American history. Additionally, I have interviewed Ambassador Ettinger on several of our award-winning Focus on Israel programs and PJTN's past podcasts. If you have not seen these programs, you can view all of our past episodes at pjtn.org/media. I also want to remind you that it's important for you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues that threaten our republic and the state of Israel. So please remember to like and share. Ambassador, welcome back to Proclaiming Justice. It's always a great honor to speak with you, sir.
Thank you. It's my privilege and my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot to talk about because isolationism seems to be a popular issue these days among the right. And I wanted to start by just asking you, what exactly is isolationism and how has it shaped U.S. foreign policy in the past?
Well, the isolationists have, in my mind, a very simplistic view of the world, assuming that the U.S. can disengage from the world militarily and still be well protected, ensuring its homeland security as well as overall national security. The problem is that the world has become truly a global village. The fact that there is the Pacific Ocean on one side, Atlantic Ocean on the other side, Canada and Mexico from north and south does not ensure U.S. homeland or national security, and for the U.S. to assume that disengaging itself from combating terrorism in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and the Yemen and other parts of the Middle East and the globe would allow the U.S. to remain safe is a self-destruction delusion, because the U.S., for obvious reasons, would like to disengage itself from Islamic terrorism, let's say in Iraq or Iran or Afghanistan, but Islamic terrorism is determined not to disengage itself from the U.S. due to this very simple fact. Islamic terrorism, whether Sunni or Shiite terrorism, is driven by a vision which mandates not only to topple all what they call apostate Muslim regimes, but it mandates Islamic terrorism to bring the Western infidel to submission, especially the great American Satan. And the options for the US are very clear: to fight Islamic terrorism in Islamic terrorism own trenches, or to withdraw and fight Islamic terrorism in the US owned trenches in New York, in Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Houston, Dallas, Miami, Pittsburgh, etc. And in fact, the longer the US refrains from tackling Islamic terrorism overseas, the closer the US is going to be to that occasion where it will confront Islamic terrorism, maybe even in a way which would dwarf September 11.
Mm. Oh, yeah. So, in your view, what are the main driving forces behind this recent surge in isolationist sentiment? Because you bring up 9/11, and that's a good reminder of how our enemy sees us. And I think we've gotten lazy. But what do you think are the driving forces behind this recent surge in isolationist sentiment?
Well, it seems to me that the main cause behind that is the frustration with reality. Reality, especially, but not only in the Middle East, is pretty frustrating. It's in the Middle East, certainly it's insoluble, it's conflict ridden, and it has been going on for the last 1400 years,
Hmm.
with most
Yeah.
violence, by the way, among Muslims and among Arabs. In addition, there's also the violence towards the so-called infidel. Isolationists do not want to go along with such a reality. And in a way, they have submitted themselves to alternate reality, a
Hmm.
reality which is much less frustrating, much clearer. You don't need to study the foundation of Islamic terrorism. You don't need to study the major precepts of Islamic terrorism. In fact, you don't need to study the history of anti-American Islamic terrorism, which did not start few years ago, did not start in the 20th or the 19th or the 18th century. Well, in fact, it did start. It did start in the 18th century, when the Barbary pirates from
Mhm.
North Africa used to terrorize American commercial boats. And that caused the war against the Barbaries, when President Jefferson dispatched the US Navy to the shores of North Africa,
Mhm.
dealing the Barbaries a severe blow. Since that then until today, we have had demonstration of Islamic terrorism, irrespective of US policy, whether it is terrorism during Republican presidents or Democratic presidents. Islamic terrorism has never stopped its
Mhm.
pursuit of its own ideology,
Mhm.
which once again mandates bringing the Western infidel to submission. And they realize that the major player among Western infidel countries is the US, and therefore the US has been the number one target.
Yeah.
We hear sometimes isolationist claims that Islamic terrorism is a Persian Gulf problem, it's a Middle East problem, but why should the US get itself involved there? Anyone who claims that ignores the fact that, with all due respect to the Persian Gulf and the Middle East, Islamic terrorism has been very active in South America, in Central America, on the US-Mexico border, and through hundreds, maybe more than hundreds, terror sleeper cells in the US itself. In the 2025 threat assessment by the FBI, the Homeland Security Department, and by the National Director of Intelligence, all those reports of 2025 threat assessment highlight Iranian-controlled Islamic terrorist cells operating on U.S. soil, considering the October 7, 2023 horrific terrorist assault on Israel as an inspiration for similar acts on U.S. soil. We have seen Iranian Islamic terrorists collaborating very intensely with every single drug cartel in Mexico, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Brazil. We have seen Islamic terrorists, Iranians, and Hezbollah collaborating with every single anti-American government in Latin America. And the reason they focus on Latin America is because they view Latin America correctly as the soft underbelly of the USA. And since their aim is to erode as much as possible the US posture, strategic posture throughout the world, they focus on the soft underbelly of the US. And again, for the US, it would make much more sense to confront those threats as far away as possible from US homeland rather than face it on US soil.
Yeah, well, we found out what it feels like to have the attack on U.S. soil with 9/11. You're absolutely right. And I love the fact that you bring up the Barbary pirates, because as I was reading the article on this issue that you drafted, you talked about how the Barbary pirates, when they kept attacking us even back then, they never went away. They're still out there. Their goal is still to dominate America. And we see that influence, coming into our country, just like you said, across the border. I want to talk about the issue of anti-Semitism, because it seems like as this push to isolationism is increasing, we are also witnessing an increase in anti-Semitism. So my question is America's turn inward making it easier for anti-Semitism to thrive, both here in the States and abroad?
Well, from my own knowledge or acquaintance with the U.S., anti-Semitism in the U.S. is by far lower than it has been in Europe. And that has to do with the Judeo-Christian values, which are at the foundation of the U.S. culture in general, U.S. political system, U.S. justice. However, we have had certainly intensification of anti-Semitism in the U.S., which is largely an outcome of lack of education on the issues which preoccupy headlines in the U.S. There is a great deal of ignorance when it comes to the nature of the Middle East, to the nature of Hamas in Gaza, to the nature of the Iranian threat, and maybe most importantly, to the nature of the cultural aspect of the Palestinian issue. We are talking about Palestinian society in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, Palestinian society in Gaza, which since 1993 has experienced hate education installed by Mahmoud Abbas, the current chairman of the Palestinian Authority. He was then in 1993 the deputy of Yasser Arafat, who was the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, and he established hate education system K through 12, a system of incitement in the mosques and hate media controlled by the Palestinian Authority, and those are the elements of education, religion, and media which dominate Gaza and Judea and Samaria. What we saw on October 7, 2023, shouldn't have shocked people because it was the outcome of that hate education. When you conduct hate education, brainwashing kids from kindergarten through graduation of high school to terrorize Jews in general, the Jewish state in particular, as well as the infidel West, when you induce children to become martyrs for the cause of the Palestinians' victory over the Jewish state, you in fact operate education system which is the most effective production line of terrorism. Yeah. Every graduate of that education system is a potential terrorist. When we talk about Gaza, we do not talk about a population taken over, controlled, subjugated by Hamas terror organization. We are talking about a terror state, Gaza, not terror organization Hamas in Gaza. During Hamas control of Gaza, going back to 2007 until today, we have seen the whole population of Gaza rejoicing Hamas terrorism, heralding Hamas terrorists. And when the terrorists of October 7th, 2023, brought to Gaza over 200 Jewish hostages, some dead and mostly then alive, those hostages were paraded in Gaza, and the entire population was on the verge of lynching those hostages, heralding the Palestinian so-called heroes who succeeded in raping, beheading, killing those those Jewish hostages from Israel. We're talking about Gaza, which has thrived on hate education and violation of human rights, issuing media pronouncements which are embraced by Western so-called elite media. Who would embrace media pronouncements if they were issued on U.S. homeland, if one knows that those announcements were issued by American terrorist organization, American hate education. But here we have the entire American population exposed to media which relies on Hamas numbers, on Hamas propaganda, And again, Hamas, which has a track record, hate education, incitement during Friday sermons in the mosque, incitement through official media, conducting terror acts which are the worst ever performed by any Muslim organization. I would say worse than Nazi terrorism,
Mm.
because Nazis did not parade the concentration camp. The Nazis were trying to hide the concentration camps. Hamas terrorism has paraded the outcome of its terrorism in the streets of Gaza, and the elderly and the youngsters and the young adult all have cheered the modern day Islamic heroes coming out of Gaza. Sadly, not enough has been done to set the record straight. And most importantly, Israel fighting Islamic terrorism is fighting terrorism which views Israel as a secondary target. The number one target, the leading target for Islamic terrorism has always been the infidel West, and primarily the infidel great American Satan. And therefore, when Israel fights terrorism, we are also fighting America's own war. In many respects, Israel has been the first line of defense of Western democracies. It's not the first time, by the way, that we fight those wars in defiance of Western pressure, in defiance of Western condemnation. You can go back to 1981, when the West was leaning on Israel brutally to refrain from attacking the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981.
That's
And
right.
after destroying it, we were punished brutally by the US. Shipment of combat aircraft was suspended. A series of defense collaboration agreements were suspended as well. It took the US about 10 years after the first Gulf War in 1991 to admit publicly, and this was done by then Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney, who thanked Israel after the first Gulf War for bombing the Iraqi nuclear reactor in 1981, which spared the US potential nuclear confrontation in 1991. How many thousands of lives were spared by that Israeli action? How many trillions of dollars were saved by that Israeli action? And that's one of many acts of defiance carried out by Israel, which initially were severely condemned, but years later were acknowledged to be of great service to the US and to the Western world as a whole.
Well, Israel has had to stand alone too often, too many times in history. But does this isolationism, especially specifically in the United States, does it reflect a loss of courage, or worse, I would say, a loss of compassion? What do you think it is because it just seems like this issue rises up every so often. And yes, it does. It poses a threat to Israel, but thank God that Israel responded even despite the negative consequences that came with our government at the time. But as you said, Cheney recognized it was the best thing to have happened. And I fear we're hearing the same thing, Ambassador, today, that everybody's afraid that if we attack, Trump has told Bibi to not attack, to withhold the attacks. Like with Hamas, we're still dealing with that issue. What is it? What is it? What's the reason behind this? Is it a loss of courage?
Well, I think that it's mostly lack of recognition or lack of acquaintance with the Middle East context. When I say context, Middle East history, Middle East religion, Middle East ethnicity, Middle East culture. And when you lack that information, it's very easy to resort to an assumption, which has nothing to do with reality, that everything in the Middle East is conducted in accordance with typical business transactions.
Mm,
Supposedly, the Middle East, just like most of the world of the West, is adheres to money talks. One of the worst errors to make when observing the Middle East is to observe the Middle East through Western lenses. While in the West, money talks, in the Middle East, it's ideology that talks, it's religion that talks.
great point.
Obviously, it's frustrating. Obviously, it makes it next to impossible to resolve conflict, but that's the reality that we live in. And when you ignore that reality and you assume that everything is transactional, we meet, we deliberate about the disagreements, we meet somewhere halfway, we shake hands, we signed an agreement,
Right.
and then we are moving towards reconciliation. While the West views negotiation, according to Webster Dictionary, as a step towards reconciliation, in the Middle East, when it comes to the Ayatollah regime, when it comes to
Hmm.
Hezbollah, when it comes to Hamas, when it comes to the Houthis, when it comes to the PLO, negotiation is a step which allows you to lick the wounds, which provides you the way out of a much more painful military offensive by the US or by Israel. It also is a tactic for time stalling.
Mm,
The Iranians are very smart, very sophisticated, astute. They know that the midterm election is in the US is around the corner.
mm,
They know that midterm election may have a major impact on President Trump's freedom of action and prestige in the US and in the world. And for them, negotiation brings them closer to the midterm election. Moreover, while we speak here, um, uh, Iran benefits right now from Chinese and North Korean, possibly Russian assistance to restore their conventional ballistic and nuclear capability. The longer they stall negotiation, the closer they
mm.
are to restoring their capabilities. And the end outcome or the end aim is to enable them once again to deal a blow to the Western infidel. The
Mm,
assumption
mm,
that you deal the Ayatollahs a blow by bombing, and which was very called for by bombing three of their major nuclear installations. By doing that, you finish the war, you end the war. That's a very short sighted view of Iran and of the Middle East. This is only one milestone in a
right.
long way required to bring an end. And last and not least, the isolationists
Mm,
wish to end all wars, wish to prevent wars, to minimize wars. Well, there is a reality. The reality is that you cannot prevent, minimize, or end wars while the major epicenter of war is still alive. and that
Right.
has been the Ayatollah regime in Tehran. Namely, if you want to accomplish the very positive aim by isolationists, ending wars, preventing wars, you must launch a war and uproot the major epicenter of war, which is the Ayatollah regime. As long
Right.
as the Ayatollah regime is in place, there is no hope for
Mhm.
minimizing or preventing wars.
Well, you make a great argument because it just proves that America's withdrawal from this effort by becoming isolationists is emboldening the regimes that want to destroy us. You talked about the education and the indoctrination of their kids in K through 12 education, the propaganda that Palestinians subject their kids to. I'd like to know, here we are negotiating with Qatar. What are they teaching their kids? What about Saudi Arabia? These are the Qatar is the biggest funder of propaganda in curriculum, and we see the impact of what happened with the Palestinian kids. They will, and parents willfully give up their kids as martyrs to kill Jews. And look at what we're seeing happening in the United States, Ambassador. We've come a long way since you served as ambassador in the Southwest. And unfortunately, we see the impact of the propaganda in the curriculum, in the textbooks that are funded by Qatar. I know we're penalizing Harvard, for the chaos and the anti-Semitism on their campuses, but what about the people that are funding that chaos? Why aren't we dealing with Qatar? Why are we talking? Why are we sitting at the same table with Qatar and allowing them to negotiate on behalf of Israel and Hamas? It makes no sense.
Well, we have an interesting test case here. On the one hand, you have the Palestinian Authority, which since 1993 has activated a very intense hate education system, hate religious and media system. And this, in my mind, is at the foundation of no peace between
Mhm.
Israel and the Palestinians. On the other hand, you have the case of the United Arab Emirates. Upon signing peace treaty with Israel, the United Arab Emirates uprooted completely hate education, which was there until the Abraham Accords. And not only did they uproot hate education, but they have replaced it with positive education about Jews, about Judaism, and about the Jewish state. And that is the foundation for very, very constructive and mutually beneficial peace accord between Israel and the Emirates in the Persian Gulf. When you are engaged in negotiation with an entity that is driven by an ideology which mandates bringing to submission the counterpart to negotiation, there's no
Mhm.
point in negotiation. We have a case today in Syria, and there are different assessments. Is the current leader of Syria indeed a reformed terrorist, an ideologue who has become a pragmatist, or is he engaged in
Mhm.
dissimulation, cajoling Western policy makers? There is a very effective way to find out about it, and I would add, before you suspend economic sanctions, before you renew diplomatic relations,
Mhm.
before you shake the hand of the leader of Syria. And that way, that formula is very simple. You precondition any benefits to
Mhm.
Syria, you precondition negotiation with Syria upon the current leader of Syria proving his real colors by uprooting hate
Right.
education, by ending incitement in Syrian mosque, by stopping hate media. And when I say hate, it's hate against the apostate Muslims, it's hate against the infidel West, it's hate against the Jewish state. Once the Syrian leader does that, then we know, indeed, we are talking about a terrorist being transformed into a reformist and pragmatist leader. But until he does that, we have no way of ascertaining any speculation. And not only that, we should be aware of recent past. Before the current leader, there was Bashar Assad. When Bashar Assad assumed power in 2000, he was welcomed as a potential moderate by the Western foreign policy establishment. Former Senator John Kerry and his wife used to dine with Bashar Assad and his wife in Damascus and in Washington. Thomas Friedman of the New York Times heralded Bashar Assad as he did Yasser Arafat, and it didn't take too long before Bashar Assad was proven to be even more ruthless, even more of a butcher than was his father Assad. The same, by the way, applied to Khomeini of Iran. Khomeini was wise enough to surround himself with young, polished, very eloquent young advisors, graduate of Western universities. They spoke number of Western languages, and that impressed immensely Western policymakers, who concluded that Ayatollah Khomeini would be very amenable to pro-US policy, would be anti-Soviet, and would not engage in exporting the Islamic revolution beyond the boundaries of Iran, only to wake up one morning and find out that the same Ayatollah Khomeini indeed became the chief epicenter of anti-American terrorism, drug trafficking, and money laundering. And I think it's time to learn from past mistakes rather than repeat them.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought this issue up with Syria because, you know, the Syrian leader currently was still, we don't know, a member of Al Qaeda. Maybe he still supports that. He's all dressed up, and, you know, you bring up a very important point. Are we really vetting these people? Are we just giving a handshake and saying, okay, you've contacted us, you want to, you know, help out in the Middle East? What about the justice? What about the people that the Druze, like we just heard, how the Druze are being slaughtered by this leader who happens to be, you know, in relationship with the Trump administration, with our Secretary of State? This is very disturbing to see all of this going on. These are the same people who slaughtered Christians, and you know it's shocking. But I want to move to the issue of America First, because we've seen Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and others, Steve Bannon, are pushing again this whole isolationist narrative. And as a result, from my perspective, it appears that this whole America First rhetoric, or this whole America First movement, seems to be, you know, inciting a new kind of anti-Semitism. But they're, you know, it's all cloaked in America First. We've got to stand with America and protect American interests. But to me, you can't protect American interests if you're not going to protect and defend the state of Israel, the people who stand on the front line of this war of you know, anti-West values. You know, what do you think? Do you think America First is inciting this new form of anti-Semitism that they cloak in this new isolationism? or modern day isolationism, I should say.
I think America first, American exceptionalism are very, very not only vital ideas, but very viable ideas, provided it's based on reality. Uh, you cannot base it on speculations. You cannot base it on simplistic view of the world. You have to
Hmm.
base it on reality, or else you become very, very self-destructive. I don't think that anyone should undermine the idea of America first or American exceptionalism. The world needs an America first USA. The world needs American exceptionalism USA, because that is what makes the US a very deterring element, and the free world needs major posture of deterrence on the part of the US. But when you base it on the simplistic view,
Hmm.
as I heard from some isolationists, no big deal if Iran becomes nuclear, because after all, North Korea is nuclear, Pakistan is nuclear, India is nuclear. So what's the big deal? Supposedly, Iran will also be nuclear, but it is a big deal because neither North Korea nor Pakistan are driven by an ideology
Hmm.
to bring the world to submission and spread their own religion or ideology
Hmm.
throughout the globe. None
Right.
of them, neither North Korea nor Iran, certainly no other nuclear power in the world, are apocalyptic.
Right.
But when it comes to the Ayatollah regime, not only are they mandated by their ideology to spread Shiite Islam throughout the Muslim world and then throughout the rest of the world, but they're driven by an apocalyptic religion which mandates them that or stipulates that in order to bring about salvation they have to go through very bloody reality, and the more they bleed, supposedly the closer they are to the day of redemption, to the day of salvation. This is not the North Korean ideology, this is not Pakistan ideology, but it's the Ayatollah's ideology, and therefore, again, I would not focus on America first or American
Hmm.
exceptionalism. I would focus on a simple test. Are they driven by reality? Can they
Right.
stand the test of reality? Or are they driven by an
Hmm.
alternate reality, which is much more convenient, much more optimistic, much more easy to digest? But sadly, if it's not
Hmm.
reality, it cannot be successful. It has to be eventually self-destruct.
Yeah. So let me ask you this as we're going to wrap up our time together today. Do you think the popularity of people like Tucker and Candace, these isolationists, and they're spewing isolationism, do you think that there is that it's having an impact on the Christian conservatives? That these people, I mean, it was Christian conservatives who have followed these individuals and have supported them. Do you see an impact on the support of Christian conservatives of these individuals?
Well, certainly, we're talking about a few very talented individuals, sadly, turning towards a self-destructive direction, and
Right.
we cannot ignore their impact. But as I learned in Texas, which I visit few times a year, it ain't the first one, it ain't the last one, and it ain't the worst one. We have been
Yeah.
through some severe challenges. Not only have we, the U.S. and Israel, have prevailed, but we have proven our ability to surge to new heights, because many times withstanding severe challenges does embolden and does bolster one's capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Ambassador, thank you so much for taking time to share your thoughts about this issue. I know it's a big concern. It is a big concern for us here at PJTN. And I know among many Christians who used to follow these individuals, they're very upset with the position that they've taken. But as we close, are there any final comments you want to share with our audience, and why it's important for us to speak out to our elected officials, and how can we help you, sir?
Well, I think the number one target should not be helping us in Israel. The number one target, which is also important for Israel, is to do the utmost to strengthen the USA. Weak USA undermines Israel's security. Strong USA bolsters Israel's security. And one of the ways of making the US stronger is register one's opinion, register facts which individuals are aware of with their representatives in the House and in the Senate. And people should realize the House members and senators do value feedback from their constituents. Legislators are very, very much aware of constituents and very concerned about constituents, and never underestimate your own impact. And once again, I'll resort to things I learned in Texas. Over there, they say sometimes a blade of a grass can deflect a cannonball. And each one of your viewers is certainly more significant than blade of a grass. So why hesitate, and why not share your opinion with people who count? And those are the co-equal legislators.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much for your words of encouragement and for having this conversation with us today. We so appreciate everything that you do and the reminder of our responsibility here in America. God bless you, sir, and we look forward to having you back on the program at a later time. I always find our interviews very enlightening. So thank you again. God bless you, sir.
Thank you for your own commitment and friendship. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this program. We will post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share with your family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical and moral mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Marxist and Islamist threat that is destroying this nation and other Western nations, threatening our Judeo-Christian values and promoting anti-Semitism. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. As a watchman, you can sound the alarm and warn others by simply sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this mission through our award-winning documentaries and Focus on Israel programs, as well as more programs just like this one for just $20 a month. So go to our website at pjtn.org to watch our programs and listen to our past podcasts. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines. But we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.